Hey guys, and welcome back to SEC fans. If you can't tell, you're not going to see Daniel's smiling face, and I'm not sure if he's going to be able to do an intro or not, but he's still stuck in India, so you guys are stuck with me doing a little bit of a monologue. I'm going to present some models this week. Try not to get too crazy with it. Keep things a little shorter so you don't have to hear my grating voice any longer than you need to. But I'm Josh, and this is SEC Fans. We're a statistic-based channel. If you like what we've been doing or you like what we've done, I encourage you to hit subscribe. It helps a lot if we get followers and subscribers and kind of get traction. We've enjoyed the interaction we've had with you guys in the forums. We've definitely mixed it up with you guys. I think we've generally tried to be respectful, and the biggest thing is, if you're going to call us an idiot, at least tell us why. Back it up with some data. Don't just tell us we have a bad observation. The reason we bring statistics so hard in all this is it's not just supposed to be our baseline opinion. If you have our opinion on something, you're going to get our opinion and you're going to get something to back it up, some evidence that shows that maybe our opinion has some merit. And I think that gives a little bit more of an interesting discussion than the Twitter points that you generally get right now from the major media networks. Anyway, we're going to turn pretty quickly to the models in these games, and we're going to start with LSU versus Mississippi State. First thing I want to get to here is just LSU in general coming off the Georgia game. Obviously, both of us picked LSU to lose last week to Georgia. I don't think that was really a surprise to anyone, and I think even LSU fans coming off the loss to Florida didn't really expect to win, at least not totally. They thought maybe you can, but it's a different thing to objectively say we're a better team than Georgia, given how LSU looked against Florida at times. And I think there's a lot of interesting things you can take from that game, but I'm going to give you a couple talking points here to sort of explain, in my view, what were the defining characteristics that made the LSU offense successful against Georgia, what caused that game to go the way it did. And the first thing I'll note is successful drives. This is something that I generally track, and I view a successful drive as a drive that either goes 8 plays or results in a score. If you do one or the other of those things, that offensive possession has been a success. And something we talk about off and on the show sometimes, teams typically get about 12 to 15 possessions in a game. When LSU had the ball against Georgia, if you looked at the just general box score and you see LSU outgained Georgia 475 yards to 322, that looks like LSU generally was winning. But that is in and of itself a little deceptive, I think, because LSU actually ran 81 plays to Georgia's 64. Now, a Georgia fan that was coming back to an LSU fan might sort of trumpet that to say, LSU had 6.7 yards per attempt. Georgia had 6.1. LSU had a better rush attack, 5.4 yards per carry to Georgia's 3.8. But really, it's not that much dominant. The score is not really indicative of what happened. I disagree in this case. The score is completely indicative of what happened on the football field, and I'll tell you exactly why. LSU had 12 full possessions in the game. Not counting the sort of knee out game end of the game. In those 12 possessions, LSU, by my count, had 9 successful drives. There were 9 drives in that game that LSU had 8 plays or more, or resulted in a score. LSU also went 3 and out 3 times in that game. So in 75% of LSU's possessions that had scoring ability, LSU put forth a successful drive. They were able to drive down the field, either score points or change field position, move the ball. The yard per play differential wasn't that high, and we'll get to that in a second. But the fact that the yard per play potential wasn't maybe that different sort of belies the fact that LSU was able to more or less methodically move the ball down the field and was successful in the run. Something we flagged, and I hope people appreciate this. Our videos are usually more about trying to show you things that could happen in a game, especially really all the way up to about week 9 in the season because there's so many unknowns. We had flagged the fact that Georgia's rush defense was not really particularly good given the competition they faced. They'd actually been pretty average. They just faced teams that hadn't been able to run the ball. Well, LSU was able to run the ball consistently, really in a level they hadn't done all year. And, LSU offensively is pretty dependent on the run. They'd gotten 5.6 yards per carry against Ole Miss, but other than that, they hadn't had 5 yards per carry in a single game. So getting in that against Georgia really kind of changed the complexion of the game, and the fact that LSU was really able to constantly stay on schedule and extend drives. And even though it didn't feel like at times they were dominating offensively, that's a little bit deceptive because LSU was driving the ball far better than Georgia. I mentioned the fact that LSU had 75% of their drives. That's 9 out of 12 that they were able to have a successful drive. LSU did not. 5 of 12 Georgia possessions, Georgia did not. 5 of 12 Georgia possessions ended with 3 passes, interestingly. They threw the ball way more than they should. Now, they weren't being overly successful running it, but when you factor in sacks and all, I don't think they were that unsuccessful. And the one long drive, really, that they had, they threw no passes until the last few downs where they ended up faking the field goal and not getting the field goal. But they had run the ball successfully the whole drive. And Georgia went 3 and out 4 times in the game. Twice in the game, they had 3 plays and an INT. So both of those 3-play and INT drives, by the way, were all passes. So you had 6 of Georgia's possessions that were 3-play drives. Only 4 Georgia possessions went 8 plays or more, or it resulted in a score. So again, the point being, even if the yardage total was different, now the yardage total was different because the play count was different, and the play count was so different because LSU was tremendously better at actually sustaining drives in this game than Georgia was. And Georgia, I put a lot of the blame personally on the fact that Georgia completely panicked in the second quarter, went away from the run. They had 2 back-to-back possessions, I believe, where they didn't run the ball once. They threw all passes, and it just sunk them, really. So moving out of that, we're kind of getting back into this game a little bit. LSU versus Mississippi State. LSU turning to the model, still being a very good defense, holding teams to about 84% of their rushing averages. That's a very good number. It's not necessarily elite, a lot like Alabama and Georgia. None of the SEC defenses at the traditional powers have been especially good against the run. They've all been able to be run on. They're still quite good, but neither Alabama, LSU, nor Georgia has been able to really consistently shut down the run. Ironically, the way that Kentucky and Texas A&M have, which is a big reason that those 2 teams have the records they do. Mississippi State a little better against the run, 79%, not really a huge difference, and you can sort of chalk that one up, if you will, 4% to the maybe variations in the teams. Where these 2 teams do have a little bit of a distinction is pass defense. LSU's pass defense, as we've said all year, is extremely good. 79% of opponent passing averages, we talk about a lot. If you get that number under 80, you're doing really, really darn good. It's just hard to keep passing teams below their averages unless they're a bad passing team that you can really disrupt them. Mississippi State is a good pass defense, 86% of opponent averages. We've cautioned in the past that they're a little bit boom or bust, though. They tend to make teams inefficient passing the ball, but not necessarily preventing the big plays. What does it all turn out to? Well, when we run this, again, we build a statistical model really per team, so it's relational. So our model doesn't give you a single metric for LSU or Mississippi State. The model has to be run for each matchup, looking at what each team is good at, and then it builds a scoring model unique to each team based off what factors were relevant to you for success. We've gotten this a lot in the comments, but those factors do include things like, your ability to deal with turnovers and special teams play and all that stuff kind of factors into it. I'm not going to get into too much discussion there. But it is all basically computer driven and how all that plays out. The reason for that is to give a neutral baseline so that this isn't my opinion or my idea of what factors matter in a football game. This is a computer sitting there and saying, okay, if you're LSU, this is what really matters for you to score. And this is the sort of conditions it takes for you to score points in a football game and how much you'll score in those conditions. Based off that, it's predicting that Mississippi State will outgain LSU, 4.9 yards per play to 4.7 yards per play. And now I should have a caveat. They outgain them in a per play sense. We use per play numbers because they factor out tempo. But just because Mississippi State outgains LSU per play does not mean that Mississippi State will necessarily outgain LSU in total offense. Again, referring back to the Georgia game, if LSU is able to stay on schedule better, they'll be more successful. And that caveat I give is important because it has LSU winning this game 26-12, despite the fact that Mississippi State is expected to outgain LSU per play. I think the reason for that's pretty straightforward, and this turns over quickly to Mississippi State. Mississippi State's offense this year has been sort of hit or miss, I think, with Moorhead and his play calling and play selection. We were, I won't even say critical, but really kind of curious to see how Moorhead would take the approach he had at Penn State, which was a very successful offense, and what he'd had at the FCS level and how he'd apply it. And early in the season, we'd seen Mississippi State have tremendous amount of success running the ball, mainly with the tailbacks, but they were taking a lot of deep shots and were being very unsuccessful with it. Now, they got away with it because they could throw a deep pass on 2nd and 3 miss and then get 12 yards on 3rd and 3, and none of it really mattered, and they still scored. The concern we had is if they had to take those shots in regular games, it throws away downs. And one of the most important things in the game of football is to not throw away downs. Incompletions kill drives if you're not running the ball extremely well. And that stuff all sort of piles up. Mississippi State, I think, has really changed the way they sort of approach things. And to sort of give you an idea of why I say that, against Florida, Mississippi State's play selection had been 32 runs to 26 passes. Now, the runs 3.3 yards per rush, pass 3.8 yards per pass, which is, by the way, anything less than 6.5 is terrible. That was not a great selection. Now, the 3.3 yards per carry is not good enough to be overly successful there, and I get that. But the important thing I want to note is how balanced that was. And when they played Auburn, on the other hand, 57 runs to 17 passes, completely different. You went from about 55-45 to all of a sudden you're about almost 80% run against Auburn, and they 6.1 yards per carry. Again, Auburn weren't really successful throwing the football too much against Mississippi State. I mean, Mississippi State was 4.1 yards per attempt. That's terrible. 9 of 17, 69 yards, and an interception. But the trick was that Mississippi State leaned way more on the rush. Now, here's a different comparison that I haven't really heard before that I'll throw out there for Mississippi State. Against Florida, they, with Fitzgerald, they threw 26 passes, and Hill got 9 carries. So we talked about pass per run. Now, that includes Fitzgerald and his components in the offense. But I'm just talking about Hill, your primary ball carrier. So you had 26 passes from a guy that's averaging 3.8 yards per attempt, and Hill himself only gets 9 carries. That's just not a great number. It's not great balance. I think Hill, even in that game, he may not have been terribly successful, but Hill was still averaging 4.6 yards per carry. I mean, he was more effective than you were throwing the football. Had a higher per carry average than you had per attempt average. That's unusual. But those 26 passes to 9 runs, that's 35 plays for comparison. Now, that same split, Fitzgerald throwing versus Hill running, was 34 plays in the Auburn game. So either a Hill carry or a Fitzgerald rush, you had almost exactly the same number. The difference was against Auburn, that split was really different. You end up with Fitzgerald throwing the ball, and let me check this number because something I have here doesn't make sense. But Fitzgerald threw the ball in that Auburn game 17 times, and Hill rushed the ball 23 times. So rather than Hill, and this is where I said it doesn't make sense, you had 35 carries, or 35 touch split, we'll say, 26 passes to 9 rushes. Now with a 40 touch split, it's 17 passes to 23 rushes. Hill gets the ball more. Now, against Auburn, Hill averaged 5.5 yards per carry, less than a yard per carry more than he got against Florida. The difference is that he got more carries than Fitzgerald was asked to pass the ball. That made a tremendous difference, and that was a big reason why I think Mississippi State was more successful. So why am I saying all that? I don't think this score differential is quite as bad as it looks on paper, 26 versus 12. And the reason is, for a lot of the season, Mississippi State has not been very successful, I think, in converting points because they've been way too many wasted plays, essentially, due to trying to do more with Fitzgerald throwing the ball than he's really capable of doing. I think really 2 weeks ago when they were playing Auburn, Moorhead, being a pretty intelligent coach, realized he needed to adjust. They'd come out of the Florida game. They hadn't been successful. And he went back to the drawing board a little bit and used a play selection more akin to what Dan Mullen had done the year before. And that's just Moorhead having to use the talent he has on his team, not really being able to run his own system, but he was able to be more successful with it. I think Mississippi State is going to be more efficient offensively. If he maintains that approach, if he maintains the approach of being able to run the ball first, and Fitzgerald only throws the ball as a counter and it's something to keep the other team honest, it may not be necessarily pretty in certain ways, but it'll be a lot more successful. I think throw away less plays, generate more points off production than we've seen from Mississippi State. Now, does that mean that I think Mississippi State will win? No, it doesn't. I still think LSU has an edge here. LSU as a team, I haven't been able to peg down. Now it's easy to say that I've missed on calling against LSU and their wins, but I also picked LSU in their loss. I haven't been able to judge LSU correctly all season. I'm not sure if that's an issue with me or if it's an issue with LSU and how they're playing to their competition. I do think LSU probably should score somewhere in the 20s. I think it'll be a little bit lower. I have this game 24-17 LSU over Mississippi State. I think that's right at the line, so it makes sense to me. Basically, 26 is an odd number. You're not going to score 26 points, so I think 24 is the most likely sort of place for that to fall. Again, I think Mississippi State is a little bit more efficient, so that's how you get to 24-17, excuse me, LSU over Mississippi State. In a game that I think could be pretty interesting for both teams. And I think the biggest thing is just going to be, does Fitzgerald take that step forward? Does he become the run-first guy that at times was so dynamic last year, gave teams, especially LSU and Alabama, fits with their inability to stop him from running the ball? I think LSU's rush defense is susceptible to that. Not that they're a good run defense, but you can establish the run and sort of take over. I don't know that they're as good, honestly, as Florida right now, and I think they're probably a lot better offensively. But on the other hand, Mississippi State's run defense is extremely good, and it has been all year. It's been the pass defense that's more susceptible, if anything. So it's going to put a lot more strain on LSU to have to throw the football to be successful and throw first. So interesting game. I do think LSU should win, but I think the spread's about right. And I think this is going to be a tight game and an interesting test for both teams. It's just going to be interesting to see how Mississippi State does coming off that bye. Anyway, so if you like what we're doing, again, please subscribe if you haven't already. You can hit up in the comments and let us know who you think is going to win this game. And I think also let us know, do you think Mississippi State's going to be able to run the ball? Or do you think LSU is going to be able to dominate with the run? Because I do think the team that runs the ball better is going to win this game. Anyway, again, hit subscribe if you haven't. I hope you check out the rest of our videos this week. And Daniel and his smiling, shining face will be back next week to, give you guys a good look and harass you in the comments.